Welcome to the Alpha Reading Channel. Here I share early drafts of my book so you can follow the story as it's being written. I post new parts as long as there's interest from you, the viewers. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a royal like. Chapter 8. Jin looked at the menacing stranger, not knowing what to expect. The man's piercing gaze seemed to see right through him. "I'm just a guest," he said firmly. "I've been helping Lady Anira with herbs for the second week now." The man's brows drew together and his lips twisted in a contemptuous smirk. "Lies," the stranger roared. In the same second several throwing knives whistled through the air, rushing with deadly precision straight at him. His body reacted faster than his mind. Jin sharply leaped aside, ducked, rolled under the flying steel. Without stopping for a moment, he lunged toward the window and in one motion jumped outside, into Anira's garden under a shower of glass shards. But the stranger didn't intend to give up so easily. Before Jin could catch his breath, the man rounded the house with cat-like agility, pulling out new blades on the move. "Where did he get so many of these things? What sector you from?" the man thundered, taking a fighting stance. "Who sent you?" His eyes blazed with undisguised fury and suspicion. "No one sent me," Jin shouted back. "I don't belong to any sect, just a traveler." At this moment semi-transparent text flashed before his eyes, sending a chill down his spine. "No, not now." He gritted his teeth, mentally pleading. Why did this cursed technique always choose the worst time? Task: survive battle with mysterious stranger until Anira returns. Reward: you remain alive. Penalty for failure: death. There was no time for thinking. The stranger threw two more blades at him with terrifying precision. Did he have infinite supplies or what? Jin darted around Anira's vegetable garden, weaving between beds like he was dodging bullets. He had to watch every step. Heaven forbid he trample the precious healing herbs. What irony, risking his life but worrying more about preserving the garden. All because they might be useful to him. Blades whistled ominously centimeters from his body, forcing him to hit the dirt. One embedded itself in a juicy cabbage head right next to his temple. His throat went dry. Jin heroically died among the cabbage beds. Hell no. Thanks. Fighting this monster seemed impossible. Cloudless sky helplessly showed 3 question marks instead of a level. Had even it proved powerless to assess this man's true strength? "You're lying," the stranger growled, advancing like an avalanche. "Tell me the truth or I'll shake it out of you. This village can't stand outsiders. They'd never risk their lives covering for just anyone, especially a practitioner." "Who are you, kid? Who are you?" Jin snarled back, rolling aside. The knife entered the ground next to his head, once again barely missing. This man was suspiciously accurate, so he only managed to avoid injury at the last second. "It's not your business to know," the stranger hissed. His eyes blazed with murderous fire. "I'm the one asking questions here." "Well, you asked for it." A blade flashed in his hand. He closed the distance in one lunge, delivering a strike that could cut a bull in half. In desperation Jin pulled the serpent dagger from his spatial pocket. Steel rang against steel. The blow was so powerful that his feet sank slightly into the soft earth. The stranger chuckled in surprise. "You're also a fighter. Not bad reflexes for a simple traveler," he added venomously. Jin struggled to hold off the man's sword with his dagger. His hands trembled from the strain. Just a little more and the guy would simply crush him like a bug. Moreover, he couldn't shake the feeling this man was just playing with him. Considering the technique couldn't show his level, he could have pressed him to the ground with his aura alone so he couldn't move. But no, he preferred throwing metal at him and engaging in close combat. This was all strange, but questioning this person was pointless. And why give someone hints on how to kill you? Suddenly through the ringing in his ears came Anira's saving voice. "Gilran, stop right now. Jin is my guest, and I forbid you to touch the boy." Thank God, the herbalist had returned just in time. A little more and only scraps of him would remain, scattered across her precious garden. Maybe he'd make decent fertilizer, but he doubted that would benefit the plants. The stranger, whom Anira had called Gilran, reluctantly lowered his sword. He still drilled the youth with suspicious eyes, but apparently the herbalist's words had the desired effect. "Are you sure you can trust this guest?" Gilran hissed through his teeth. "You know how many spies prowl the area. Can't be too careful. I know who can be trusted in my house." The herbalist cut him off. Her usually gentle voice now rang like steel. "Jin has helped all the residents of this village in exchange for them giving him shelter. He's a good person, even if he is a practitioner. So you'd better put away your weapons." Gilran grimaced like he'd bitten something bitter, but obediently sheathed his sword. Jin exhaled in relief, feeling tension gradually leave his body. He carefully put the dagger at his belt, trying not to make unnecessary movements. Putting it in his spatial pocket now would be too risky. Actually, it was amazing the dagger had withstood the blow from such a strong warrior's sword. That's what a rare quality artifact meant. Even if it was earthly rank, the man's eyes still bored into him, as if trying to penetrate the most hidden corners of his soul and find something to accuse him of. Anira gestured for them to come into the house, apparently wanting to clarify the situation in a calmer setting. Jin silently followed her, feeling Gilrun watch his every step like a predator. The tension in the air seemed thick enough to cut with a knife, yet he tried to behave normally. As soon as they entered, Anira seated them at the table and began setting out cups for tea. "I think you should explain something to our guest," the herbalist said, looking meaningfully at Gilrun, "and also apologize for your inappropriate behavior." Gilrun winced like he had a toothache, but meeting the herbalist's stern gaze, reluctantly ground out, "Sorry for this incident. I understand that in our troubled times it's better to be safe than sorry. After all, wandering practitioners come through here, commit atrocities, then run back to their schools where they can't be reached." He crossed his arms on his chest and stared intently at the youth. Jin was currently in shock. A practitioner who was many times stronger than him and who could level this village had submitted to some ordinary herbalist. Moreover, an herbalist who was an ordinary mortal. Furthermore, Anira had looked at him like a mischievous boy who'd seriously misbehaved. "You really don't belong to any sect?" Gilrun asked. Jin confirmed, "I've only recently stepped onto the cultivation path. Haven't managed to find a suitable school for training yet, so now I wander the world searching for my destiny." He'd embellished a bit, but overall that was exactly the truth. Gilrun nodded thoughtfully, pondering his words. His gaze became even more penetrating, as if he was trying to see something hidden from ordinary eyes. Suddenly and very demandingly, he said, "Give me your hand." Jin hesitated for a moment, but not wanting to provoke another conflict, carefully extended his palm. Gilrun firmly gripped his wrist. In the same instant a strange tingling ran through his entire body, as if thousands of tiny needles had pierced his skin. The youth involuntarily shuddered. The man frowned. He seemed to be intently peering at something visible only to him. After several moments that seemed like an eternity, he suddenly relaxed, and a barely noticeable smile bloomed on this strange practitioner's face. "Well now," he muttered to himself in surprise. "What a curious case." Jin blinked in surprise. Just a minute ago this man had been ready to chop him to pieces, and now he was talking like they were old friends. Whatever he'd seen in him, it had made him radically change his opinion. Had he noticed the cloudless sky technique? That couldn't be. If this damn thing was so easily tracked, he couldn't avoid trouble. Gilrun leaned back in his chair, staring intently into the youth's eyes. "Since you're looking for a sect for training, why not come with me? My path leads through the Silver Mountain trails to the moonlit step school. Maybe you've heard of such a place." Jin slowly shook his head. The name was completely unfamiliar to him. Plus some incomprehensible trails. No. Obviously it was something connected to martial arts school business, but what it actually meant, he didn't know. Gilrun chuckled. "Not surprising. It's not a very well-known sect, though without false modesty I'd say it's very strong. Located east of here. Right now is recruitment season." He made a meaningful pause, as if expecting a reaction. Jin felt confused. Why such a generous offer all of a sudden? Too suspicious. "I need to think," he said cautiously, trying to buy time. Though he was looking for a sect, he couldn't just agree to the first one that came along. Gilrun nodded with understanding. A cunning glint flashed in his eyes. "Only you should consider that I'll only stay in this village until dawn. If you don't give an answer before the first birds sing, consider the chance lost. Think carefully." With these words he rose from the table and, nodding to Anira, left the house, heading toward the village elder's house. Jin remained sitting, lost in thought. Should he trust this strange man? His sudden interest in him was troubling. On the other hand, a sect was a chance to understand the mysteries of cultivation, become stronger under experienced mentors' guidance. Moreover, possibly find a way to get rid of the accursed cloudless sky technique that hung over his head like a heavy burden. He sighed heavily, feeling fatigue pile on like lead weight. He needed to think everything through with a fresh head, weigh all the pros and cons. There was still time until dawn. Anira, noticing his confusion, smiled encouragingly and poured hot tea into his cup. "Don't make hasty decisions," the herbalist said gently, "but also don't miss the opportunity if you feel this is your path. Trust your heart's guidance. Gilrun is a good man. He often helps our village. By the way, he too, like you, arrived here as a youth who'd barely grasped the beginning of his own path. Though I won't even mention when that was. I was just a little girl then." So how old was he then? Perhaps Gilrun had seen himself in him, which was why he'd changed so dramatically. How difficult it was to understand other people. Gilrun walked slowly down the village's dusty street, lost in deep thought. His mind was completely occupied by that strange youth he'd encountered at Anira's house. Remarkable, he thought, mechanically stroking his chin. In all his years of wandering he'd never met anyone like this. That boy. There was definitely something special about him. When he'd grabbed the youth's wrist, intending to read his meridians, Gilran had expected to sense the usual blockages and defects in a beginning practitioner, caused by poisons and toxins accumulated over years of worldly life or incorrect attempts to step onto the cultivation path. That would have been normal for beginning practitioners. However, to his enormous amazement, the boy's meridians turned out to be surprisingly clean and free of any contamination. Moreover, his body's very structure seemed created to absorb the world's spiritual energy like a sponge and rapidly develop on the cultivation path. Nothing less than heaven's gift. Gilran shook his head in admiration. In 20 years of wandering the eastern continent's roads, he'd seen many young talents, but had never encountered such a perfect physical foundation for developing as a practitioner. Without exaggeration, with such a body this youth could rise to heights unattainable for ordinary mortals. He involuntarily recalled ancient legends passed from mouth to mouth among practitioners for many centuries. They said that in ancient times, when heavenly will itself favored those who cultivated, people were born in the world with perfect bodies, as if specially forged from the finest alloys of creation. Their flesh carried from birth the purity of primordial chi, and their meridians could freely contain energy many times exceeding an ordinary practitioner's capabilities. Such people were said to be born to shake the heavens and overturn the earth. Only a few out of billions living were granted such luck or curse. After all, such a state of affairs caused envy in too many. No wonder such a phenomenon was often called a demon body. Could it be? Could this boy be that very inborn genius the legends spoke of? If so, for their moonlit step school he would become a priceless find. With his talent and their cultivation methods he could surely bring fame to their name across the entire continent and elevate the school to unprecedented heights. From such thoughts Gilran's heart began beating faster, and his eyes lit up with an eager gleam. 20 long years he'd wandered the world searching for worthy students for his sect. 20 years he'd returned to his native mountains with practitioners who, though they'd stepped onto the cultivation path, were quite mediocre. But now, it seemed, fate itself had sent him a chance. A chance to finish his travels and move to the next stage. Though during this time he'd become so accustomed to not being in his native sect that he didn't even know if he could settle down. Quickening his steps, Gilran approached the elder's house and decisively knocked on the door. He still had to settle some business in the village before he could set off on the return journey with a clear conscience. But now these troubles seemed like mere trifles compared to the treasure he hoped to acquire. Chapter 9. The sun was declining towards sunset, painting the sky scarlet, while Jin continued sitting at the table, working on pills. His thoughts kept returning to the practitioner's proposal about the moonlit step school, while his hands worked automatically. Maybe he really should go with him. He carefully stirred another pill portion in the mortar. After all, why not? This sect might provide answers to his questions. And if not, he could always leave or gain enough from it to search on his own. Well then, it was decided. Evening shadows were thickening outside the window. Wood crackled cozily in the stove, filling the house with warmth and soft light. Anira had already gone to sleep, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Only a few pills remained until the 100, just 5 pieces. He figured he could easily manage them on the road, since he still had 3 whole days. Having made his decision, he suddenly felt relieved. Like a weight had lifted from his shoulders, filling his heart with calm confidence that he'd chosen the right path. The night flew by unnoticed. It seemed he'd just closed his eyes when scarlet dawn was already breaking in the east. He rose from bed, feeling pleasant energy throughout his body. Sleep, though brief, had brought surprising freshness. After gathering his modest belongings into a travel bag the herbalist had kindly lent him, he went outside. Gilran was already waiting there, clad in a traveling cloak and holding an ordinary-looking staff. Seeing the youth, he broke into a broad smile. "I knew I wasn't wrong about you," the practitioner declared. "Trust me, you've made the right choice. The Moonlit Step School is always looking for capable students. Yesterday you wanted to chop my head off, and now you're talking like we've always been friends. That's practitioners for you. And about the sect, as if other sects weren't looking for new students to collect resources and increase their fighting power. Only not everyone passed their selection." Though Gilran's words flattered Jin's pride, they also caused some vague unease. The man's attitude toward him hadn't changed for no reason, but he couldn't ask about it directly since he was sure they wouldn't tell him the truth. Frankly, this stressed him out considerably. On the other hand, this practitioner was only his temporary companion, and if he decided to find a way to get rid of the demon technique, he'd have to go study somewhere. And there, he thought, some practitioner would be far from the only problem. Thinking about this, he followed Gilran to the porch where Anira had come out. Despite the early hour, she looked alert and composed, as if she hadn't gone to bed at all. "Take care of yourself," the herbalist smiled gently. "It's been a pleasant acquaintance." Jin thanked Anira from his heart, bowing deeply. "For everything you've done for me. I don't even know how to repay you." The woman waved him off, and bright wrinkles gathered in the corners of her eyes. "You've already given enough." Gilren also said goodbye, quite warmly too. Jin hadn't noticed when he'd given Anira the herbs he'd mentioned upon entering the house, but that was unimportant now. They moved forward, leaving the village. Some residents who'd woken at such an early hour waved to the youth, wishing him luck. Some even suggested he return, which surprised him. In these short 2 weeks he'd managed to win their favor simply by helping them without unnecessary questions. Who knew that was enough to change such suspicious people's opinion of him? The road wound among ancient pines, running into the distance as a ribbon of packed earth. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scents of pine needles and damp moss. Jin walked slightly behind Gilren, carefully watching his footing. Despite the good physical condition his father had drilled into him since childhood, keeping up with an experienced practitioner wasn't easy. And his pace was clearly not leisurely. The forest stretched on, seemingly endlessly. Jin lost track of time, completely focused on walking. His thoughts wandered, sometimes returning to the village, sometimes rushing forward, trying to imagine what awaited him at the moonlit step school. Several times he caught Gilren's intent, studying gaze. The man seemed to be trying to look inside and figure out how the youth had managed to reach the cultivation path. Or maybe he was just considering what he was good for and how to best use him for the sex benefit. This man didn't just travel the world far from a place where they could provide all necessary living conditions for nothing. Jin remembered Gilren's words about him being a supposedly gifted student. He wanted to laugh. If only he knew how far from that he was. All day Gilren only stopped a couple times to rest and grab a quick bite. Then he asked about how Jin had stepped onto the cultivation path, who had taught him the intricacies of energy circulation. The youth naturally answered evasively, referring to lessons from his hunter father, or to lucky chance. Apparently heaven itself had granted him such talent. He didn't want to lie at all, but he wanted to reveal the truth even less. Too much remained unclear in this story. And he had to use half-truths and avoid direct answers, since according to rumors, practitioners of high cultivation stages could determine when they were being lied to. Maybe this cloudless sky was completely illegal, and they'd kill him as soon as they learned he'd acquired such an unusual technique. They made their first camp right under the open sky, spreading blankets on soft grass. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Jin took out his herb supply and set about finishing the spirit-invigorating pills. Time was still pressing. He never would have thought before, but working on pills completely absorbed him. It seemed the entire world had narrowed to the size of the mortar in which he concentrated on mixing ingredients, carefully controlling every movement. It was an almost meditative occupation, allowing him to completely clear his mind of distracting thoughts. When the last, 100th spirit-invigorating pill was ready, a satisfied exhale escaped his lips. He proudly examined the neat rows of dark green balls lined up before him. Maybe they weren't perfect, but for a first attempt they were quite good. And most importantly, the technique had counted them all as completed, though it had rejected a couple despite their external perfection. Apparently he'd messed up something with proportions there. Gilren, who had been silently observing the youth's work until now, extended his hand and took one of the pills. After turning it in his fingers, he brought it to his nose and sniffed, then threw it in his mouth and thoughtfully chewed. How rude. And Jin had spent considerable effort on it. Quite decent, the practitioner finally said. Genuine surprise could be heard in his voice. Maybe a 5-year-old child from a family of hereditary alchemists could make the same thing, though faster, but those are details. Gilren laughed, indicating it was a joke. Jin frowned, looking at him. If only he knew what trouble those damn cave gourds had cost him. Put aside alchemy until morning, the man continued, yawning widely. Tomorrow we face a long crossing, so it's better to rest well now. Gather strength while you have the opportunity. With these words he wrapped himself in a blanket and turned toward the fire, making it clear the conversation was over for today. Jin put away all the pills along with the mortar Anira had given him. And at that moment semi-transparent lines flashed right before his eyes. Task complete. You have made 100 spirit-invigorating pills. Reward, 85 spirit-invigorating pills. You have reached level 6. So he'd done everything right, and that was pleasing. And only a minute later the absurdity of the situation hit him. The reward for making 100 pills was 85 of exactly the same pills, minus those he'd given to Anira. He had the impression a merchant at the market had cheated him. At least he'd gotten a level for this task, not like usual where he completed it and got who knows what. This time his entire body felt bathed in a pleasant cool breeze. There was no doubt, precisely this level increase had helped him step onto the first star of the initial sphere. That meant when raising this same level, he could increase his chi reserves too, meaning grow on the cultivation path even without knowledge of spiritual methods directed toward this. Thus, the technique he'd acquired wasn't so bad, and thanks to it he could reach enormous heights, if it didn't kill him first. He involuntarily remembered the lightning strikes and threats of acute diarrhea. No way. Better to train with ordinary methods than receive such gifts. Finally he lay down on his blanket and fell into deep, dreamless sleep. In the morning he and Gilren moved on. The deeper they went into the thicket, the wilder and more untrodden the terrain seemed. Even the path they followed sometimes almost disappeared in overgrown ferns and thorny bushes. Their journey continued for about 5 more days. 5 long days alone with a not very talkative person who led him by a road known only to him. Meanwhile Jin still needed to keep up with him, since he doubted Gilren would wait for him. On the contrary, he seemed to be testing his endurance, and all their rest stops seemed to accidentally happen when the youth was already so exhausted he definitely couldn't go further. He certainly didn't plan to pretend, since a practitioner of higher stage could see through his acting, and then, he feared, everything would become much worse. During this time the scenery around them gradually changed. Dense forests gave way to fields and meadows, with villages and farmsteads appearing here and there. Jin looked with interest at the opening views, so unlike the places familiar from childhood. After all, traveling with his father he'd mostly gone through mountains and forests. In one settlement they stopped at an inn. While Gilren went to replenish supplies, the youth sat by the hearth and listened to conversations. Travelers and locals shared news, discussed harvests and commodity prices. And though during his wanderings with his father he'd already seen much, it was still very interesting to watch how people's characters and ways of life differed in different places. Another day was approaching sunset when they emerged at the foot of a mountain. Around them spread a picturesque valley, in the very center of which, like a giant mirror, stretched a lake with crystal clear water. The lake's surface was so calm and motionless it seemed frozen. In it, as in a perfect mirror, reflected snow-capped mountain peaks, the purple pre-sunset sky, and velvety green of surrounding forests. This pristine, untouched beauty was breathtaking, even surprising that no one had yet claimed this place for themselves. However, as soon as Gilren took a small gold amulet from his chest and pressed it to the trunk of the nearest, unremarkable pine, the serene picture seemed cut by an invisible blade. The air rippled, and right before them opened a passage leading to a previously hidden city. It was truly an incredible sight. Everywhere rose elegant pagodas, multi-tiered towers, and a luxurious palace on the horizon, all covered with gilding and carvings. Between them wound streets paved with white stone, crowded with many people. People in bright silk clothes bustled back and forth, talking animatedly and waving their hands. Jewels sparkled here and there. You could hear the ringing of bells and melodic flute trills. It smelled of incense, roasted meat, and sweet pastries. For a moment Jin thought he'd entered one of those fairy tale cities that wandering storytellers told about. So unreal and beautiful was the spectacle that opened before his eyes. He stood with his mouth open in amazement, unable to move or say a word. Gilren smirked, noticing his reaction. "Welcome to Hidden Moon City." Jin froze, stunned by the opening spectacle, unable to tear his gaze from the city spread before him. Gilren, on the contrary, stepped forward decisively, drawing him along. "This is our way," the practitioner called over his shoulder, skillfully navigating the colorful crowd, showing he'd definitely been here many times. As soon as they stepped onto the paved street, the passage behind them closed as if it had never been. Now houses surrounded them from all sides, and only the echo of rustling leaves and bird calls reminded them of forest and mountains. This was mind-blowing. How was this possible? Was he delirious? But the surrounding world was painfully real. He heard the buzz of voices, inhaled scents of incense and cooking food, felt light touches of silk when people brushed past him. Maybe a portal? Or huge pocket space? With these practitioners you never knew what would happen, and what of what he'd heard was true versus rumors. Jin looked around as he walked, greedily absorbing details and trying to imprint the incredible picture in his memory. 2- and 3-story houses under curved tile roofs were buried in garden greenery. Paper lanterns and bell garlands swayed over carved doors. In the gathering dusk lights flashed here and there, reflecting in bronze mirrors polished to a shine, which were precisely intended to pass light further. He got distracted and almost fell behind Gilren. Judging by the haste and purposeful faces, the workday was coming to an end, and everyone was hurrying home. The buzz of voices died down. Streets emptied. After passing several blocks, they emerged at high gates beside which stood 2 guards in silver mantles with crescent signs on their sleeves. Gilren said something quietly to them, and they, bowing respectfully to him, opened the heavy doors. Inside was a huge complex of buildings. From the main gates led a wide road paved with multi-colored tiles laid in bizarre patterns. On both sides rose pagodas and long, low structures that looked like barracks and training halls. Gilren turned to the youth with a barely noticeable smile. "We finally reached the moonlit step school." However, as soon as they entered, a very tall and thin man, like a stick, with a huge bald spot and sparse mustache appeared before them as if from nowhere and bowed deeply to Jin's companion. "Gilren, you've finally returned. 20th Master." he declared respectfully. "We've been waiting for you." Chapter 10. Gilran greeted Junior Master Zen and introduced Jin as a new student he'd brought for training. Nodding toward the youth, Junior Master Zen carefully looked Jin over from head to toe with his narrow eyes. This made it seem like he was always squinting, and for the same reason it was unclear where exactly he was looking. "You've arrived at just the right time," he said, stroking his sparse mustache which was clearly trying to grow. "Tomorrow will be the talent assessment ritual for new students, and after that will be the entrance exam to determine their initial ranking." Gilran nodded approvingly and turned to Jin. "You'll have to walk the further path yourself. Like any other practitioner who's just stepped onto the cultivation path. Show everything you're capable of." And then semi-transparent lines of the cloudless sky technique appeared before the youth's eyes again. Main task: frog who decided to learn to fly. Take one of the first 10 places during entrance exam. Reward: unknown. Penalty for refusal or failure: abnormal condition, fever and delirium for 1 week, characteristics reduced by 50%. Jin's eye twitched with irritation. This technique had once again decided to set him up and drag him into trouble. But he restrained himself and maintained an impassive expression. Only cursed mentally. Get into the top 10. Still unknown what other candidates were there, he was sure rich kids or even clan heirs trained from birth, barely after learning to walk. At least they could afford not only necessary development pills but also buy some techniques, or even hire a mentor. "Escort our new student to the other candidates," Junior Master Zen said. The man respectfully nodded in agreement. Gilran wished Jin luck, encouragingly patting his shoulder and headed toward the school's main building, while Junior Master Zen waved his hand, gesturing to follow him. They walked along a paved, winding path, passing several long buildings until finally stopping at one of them. "This is the main complex for candidates," Zen explained. "Later, after the exam, you'll be relocated according to its results. Get acquainted with other young practitioners who might well study together with you later." He pointed at the door and, saying nothing more, left. Jin froze for a moment, looking at the closed door behind which the buzz of many young voices could be heard. Then he took a deep breath, mentally prepared himself, and pushed the door. The smell of sweat, cheap food, and incense immediately hit his nose. Inside was stuffy from the crowd of people packed inside. The barracks was a long room with 2 rows of bunk beds. Almost all were occupied. Young men and women of all kinds sat, lay, and stood on them. There were sturdy village guys in simple clothes, fancy rich kids, timid types quietly huddling in corners, and noisy groups of annoyingly cheerful kids. Some clearly felt uncomfortable in the unfamiliar setting, while others behaved like they owned the place. Everyone had already formed small groups, and he was clearly one of the last to arrive. Tension and excitement hung in the air. A couple studying glances were thrown his way, but otherwise they quickly lost interest. Everyone was busy with their own business. He calmly walked to one of the free beds in the far corner, sat on the hard mattress, looking around and generally assessing the situation. There were about 100 people total in the barracks. You couldn't count exactly right away. Mostly guys, but plenty of girls too. Judging by clothes and manners, everyone had very different backgrounds, from country bumpkins seeing a big city for the first time, to arrogant aristocrats. So his first impression was confirmed by such details. Jin immediately noted several people who behaved especially provocatively and clearly wouldn't mind starting a fight with anyone who wanted it. These types immediately caught the eye, laughing loudly, looking down on others, showing superiority with their whole appearance. They were worth being wary of. A tall guy with chestnut hair slicked back was not far from him and drew attention with his statement. He was declaring to some opponent that the scum should understand he was close to the second star of the initial sphere. That guy was an insect under his feet. Jin ran an appraising glance over him, and while he couldn't say anything specific about cultivation stage, externally it was clear the guy was very solidly built. It would be physically tough to tangle with someone like that, but if he was telling the truth, better not make such an enemy. A smaller guy confirmed his friend's words. "Kin Ro from a wealthy family, haven't you heard of the Ro clan? Everyone should be his servants." The smaller guy was clearly a lackey of this Ro. And because of this, with the older one's support, he tried to look more significant himself. But the fussiness of his movements and constant glances at his friend ruined the whole picture. The youth who'd been arguing with him before was clearly scared by such arguments and hung his head, understanding he'd picked on the wrong person. But a huge guy for their age approached Kin, doubting his words about being close to the second star. "You can't determine such things. Everyone in this barracks is equal." He could be mistaken for a grown man by appearance, but his slightly puffy childish face gave away his age. But his huge body was clearly developed beyond his years. The big guy was almost 3 heads taller than the rich kid. A muffled but sharp blow sounded. The big guy flew a good 5 meters with a broken nose. "Maybe someone else wants to argue with me?" Kin Ro asked challengingly. Jin mentally smirked. No better than beasts. First thing was to intimidate others to show you were a predator. And there were many such types if you looked. The long barracks had divided into several territories, each with someone trying to take the better spot and declare they were more capable than the rest. Somewhere behind came a crunch, then a pained groan. Some thug had broken two guys' arms at once. A bit further, pleading cries could also be heard. A pecking order was gradually being established in the barracks, and that some candidates wouldn't be able to pass selection because of this didn't worry anyone, since not everyone could pass anyway. The cloudless sky technique reminded him of itself again, highlighting semi-transparent numbers above everyone's heads that let him determine their danger level. Jin quickly ran his gaze around the barracks. So, most had 4th, 5th level. Apparently that was the minimum needed to enter the cultivation path. But those arrogant guys boasting to each other. Aha! 6th level. No wonder they were so stuck up. This very kin was 7th level altogether. Though they were still very far from real masters, against the background of other candidates they really stood out, and surely considered themselves the coolest and strongest. After all, quite possibly within their clans they hadn't been so strong, and now found themselves in an environment where they were at the top of the food chain, so emotions ran high. Jin carefully looked around the barracks, observing what was happening around him. It gradually became clear that 4 potential leaders had emerged among the candidates. 3 of them were 6th level practitioners, and 1, that very Kin Ro, had reached 7th level. They were already throwing meaningful glances at each other, wordlessly making it clear they wouldn't tolerate rivals. It seemed a real battle for supremacy could break out at any moment. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by chomping sounds to his right. It was so annoyingly loud and continuous that ignoring it was simply impossible. He turned his head and saw a chubby guy eagerly eating a juicy melon. He was dressed in rich clothes, but his manners revealed a commoner. More like a farmer than offspring of a noble family. "This is an old rule," the guy mumbled with his mouth full, not stopping his chomping. "My father told me that first a room commander is always determined. Internal hierarchy is important. Because later we'll have to face other outer disciples, and that'll be really tough. Oh, by the way, I'm Finn, but they often call me Eating Finn. But I don't take offense. What's your name?" Jin tossed back his name in an annoyed tone. Because as soon as Finn mentioned room commander, lines from the cloudless sky technique appeared before his eyes again. Additional task: can't beat them, lead them. Become room commander this night by defeating 4 potential leaders. Reward? Unknown. Penalty for refusal or failure: acute diarrhea for 3 days. Jin's eye twitched, almost freezing in a nervous tic. This accursed technique seemed determined to ruin his life. He gritted his teeth, seething with anger. Diarrhea for 3 days? Seriously? Had its imagination run out? That had been used before. "What's wrong with you?" Finn asked curiously, watching the face twisted with irritation that the youth didn't even try to hide. Jin didn't dignify him with an answer. Just took a deep breath, trying to calm down and organize his thoughts. Then opened his status window and studied it carefully. Since a fight was unavoidable, he needed to at least get an advantage. Most opponents were 6th level like him, which meant he needed to surpass them. After hesitating, he put 10 development points each into strength and agility, leaving 40 in reserve. His body immediately responded with pleasant tingling, as if a light electric charge had run through him. His muscles, filled with strength, became firm and hard. So these characteristics really worked, and so effectively that his body seemed to change under the technique's influence, adapting to the numerical indicators. Rising decisively so he wouldn't even think about punishment for losing, he headed toward one of those vying for room leadership. The guy was groping a pretty girl, ignoring her active resistance. The poor thing desperately struggled, trying to break free, but no one rushed to help her. They either pretended everything was fine or looked away. Everyone was afraid to mess with this thug, especially the girls who didn't want to end up in place of the unlucky one. A minute ago he'd broken 2 candidates' arms, so the rest had already acknowledged his leadership, and all resistance had died down after the show of force. "What are you planning?" Finn anxiously called out to Jin. The youth quoted the stupid technique, smirking crookedly. "Can't beat them, lead them." Since the technique was forcing him to act this way, he had to use it to build his reputation in this place. He felt this would come in handy. Approaching the thug closely, he calmly patted his shoulder. The guy spun around sharply, drilling him with an angry stare. "What the hell do you want, little one?" The guy growled, baring his teeth. "I smell cow shit," Jin replied. Decided to check. The girl looked at him with pleading eyes. Crystals of tears already appeared in the corners of her sapphire blue eyes. She was beautiful. Very beautiful. Short black hair framed her face and covered her narrow forehead, sharp chin and equally sharp little nose, emphasized by a beautiful cheekbone line. Now it was clear why this guy had chosen her among the others. Jin lingered his gaze on her for only a couple moments, then returned to the idiot. Ringing silence hung over this part of the barracks. The thug's jaw muscles even started working from fury. "Oh, how slow he is thinking. unacceptably expensive. The guy shoved the girl aside as if she meant nothing to him and stepped toward Jin, clenching his fists. "I'll crush you," he roared. "Remember the name Kador Bull, bastard. That's the last thing you'll hear in this life. I'll break your neck." Jin sneered, smiling broadly. "Yeah, Kador Bull bastard. I'll remember that." The next moment the guy raised his huge fist to strike. But the youth was faster. He sharply thrust forward his open palm, slapping Kador with a ringing smack, with such force that he spun in the air and face planted into the floor. Bull's cheek immediately began reddening and swelling like he'd been scalded with boiling water. Everyone's mouths fell open, staring at Jin. And he looked at his hand no less surprised. Had he overdone it with putting points into strength? That strike turned out too powerful. So much so that he feared the consequences. He wouldn't want to start his first day with broken jaws. Kador slowly got on all fours, spitting blood mixed with a knocked-out tooth. Awkwardly getting to his feet, he glanced fearfully at his opponent. "Who are you?" he wheezed, looking at the youth with horror. Jin exhaled, collecting his thoughts. He'd seen how he groped the girl against her will, seen how he broke those two poor guys' arms. He slowly walked toward Kador, but the guy, credit to him, didn't retreat, stayed in place, which meant he wasn't scared enough by the demonstration already conducted. As father said, if you don't scare a predator enough, it'll strike from behind. You need to suppress, break its will. "Don't approach," Kador roared, swinging. Bull's swing was swift but shapeless, having no specific target, so it had no particular force. Jin's body moved as if by itself. In an instant his hand shot forward, intercepting his opponent's wrist. His fingers clenched in a steel grip, fixing the limb. In humans they're arranged, without going into details, roughly the same as in animals. When you butcher them year after year, you understand perfectly where the weak spots are. With one sharp movement he twisted Bull's arm, breaking it with a distinct crunch. The broken bone tore through skin and muscle, emerging in a fountain of scarlet blood. Kador's piercing shriek, more like a pig's death squeal than a human scream, rang through the barracks. Everyone around froze, staring in shock at this scene. Ignoring the screams and groans, Jin leaned down to Bull, who was writhing in pain. His chi seethed with righteous anger, making his voice sound like thunder. "Remember, if you dare touch that girl again, I'll break your second arm. And something else. Now your new name is Kador Bull Bastard. You'll introduce yourself only like that. Am I explaining clearly?" The guy's shriek turned to pitiful whimpering, but no answer came. "Do you understand, Junior?" Jin asked again. Kador nodded rapidly, whining from terror and pain. The malice and arrogance in his eyes was replaced by the submission of a beaten dog. Only after making sure this coward's spirit was broken did the youth release the mangled arm, letting him collapse to the floor. He'd not only defeated a strong opponent but also forced him to acknowledge being junior to him, meaning he was stronger in everything. And this was reflected in the gaze of those who'd previously grouped around Kador. Bull's place as leader was irrevocably lost. Slow, sparse clapping sounded behind him, followed by a voice, melodic and full of arrogance. Not bad, the stranger noted. But maybe you should have found an opponent your own size instead of beating up a stupid blockhead?" Chapter 11. Slowly turning toward the voice, Jin saw a tall, stately youth lazily leaning against the wall. 3 sturdy guys surrounded him, clearly lackeys. All 4 were dressed in rich silk clothes and radiated the arrogance that only came from noble clans. Even without meeting such types before, everything was crystal clear. A quiet voice behind him made him look back. That very girl he'd saved from Kador's harassment looked at him with both wariness and gratitude. "Be careful," she warned. "This youth is called Lian Lut, younger son of the Lut clan, one of the most influential clans in the province. Rumor has it they cruelly avenge anyone who dares oppose members of their family." The girl pleadingly asked him not to get involved in this matter. Neither the name nor clan title meant anything to Jin. He could only suppose that since a noble family had sent their younger son here, he clearly didn't excel in strength or good manners. The clan could well provide their offspring with everything necessary for development, or this was done from desire to spy out the school's secrets. "Different rules apply here," Jin replied to the girl confidently. Though no one had explained these rules to him, apparently that was how it was. Within these walls, clan influence and wealth mean nothing. Only personal strength matters. Lian laughed upon hearing these words. Such presumption from someone who beat up a brainless lout. By defeating scum with delusions of grandeur, you've hardly become the strongest. The noble youth told him to know his place, though he admitted Jin had earned some respect with his performance. Jin looked around. Those who'd recently trembled before Kador Bull now looked at him with respect and gratitude. Lian lazily waved his hand. "I don't even want to dirty my hands on this upstart. I need to save strength before tomorrow when real trials begin." He ordered his lackeys to teach the insolent one a lesson. promising whoever delivered the most painful blow a place beside him when he took first place on the entrance exam. Lion's 3 servants immediately rushed at Jin from different sides, anticipating easy victory. Qi seethed inside him with anger and disgust. Hypocrisy, arrogance, and vileness, that was the true face of these arrogant brats. And he was supposed to study with them? The first opponent immediately collapsed like he'd been cut down by a swift slap. The second clumsily swung his fists, aiming for the head, but instantly received a hefty smack that made his eyes roll back as he slid down the wall. The third tried to strike from behind, but Jin's elbow smashed into his nose, breaking bone. Blood fountained onto the floor. The crowd around them gasped. Lian Lut visibly paled, realizing he'd underestimated his opponent, but still continued behaving arrogantly. Is that really all your attack dogs are capable of? Jin asked sarcastically. Come out and fight yourself, or will you keep hiding behind lackeys' backs? A vein bulged on the guy's forehead from fury. The air around him became barely noticeably distorted. His inner energy flared, and Lian instantly lunged at his opponent, closing the distance between them. Only a fraction of a second passed, but to Jin the attacker's movements unexpectedly seemed sluggish. He let him swing his fist, then a ringing slap echoed through the space. Another slap found its target. Lian crashed to the floor with such force that hitting it face first, he broke his nose. Wheezing and coughing, the guy tried to crawl away. Just one blow had been enough to break his arrogant spirit. Jin couldn't resist a mocking tone. Where did the clan's pride go? If not for the technique, he might have preferred to behave quietly and not attract attention. But since he had to prove himself anyway, better to deliberately act so aggressively. Honestly, it was even somewhat pleasant, showing an arrogant clan brat that his origins meant nothing here. If you can't stand up for yourself and only hide behind your clan's name, you won't get far in this world. He'd have to deal with the consequences of his actions later. I won't forgive this so easily, Lian promised. He pointed at some youth to the side and asked for help getting to the infirmary for payment. The guy quickly and happily nodded. At this moment a semi-transparent notification from the cloudless sky technique appeared. 2 out of 4 leadership contenders defeated. He stood in the middle of the barracks while dozens of eyes looked at him with fear and respect. Deadly silence hung in the air. Words weren't needed. Anyone who dared challenge him would meet a similar fate. This had been vividly demonstrated. Within these walls there was no place for boasting empty titles. Only true strength mattered. And today he'd shown them that it decided who was worthy to stand at the top. Exactly like in the animal world, everything was decided by strength. Qi bubbled inside. Though his inner spiritual power still wasn't that great, Jin perfectly felt how it flowed through meridians and energy nodes, filling his body with might he'd never felt before. No wonder practitioners so strive to climb ever further on their cultivation path. A voice from the side interrupted his thoughts. This was the third of those recognized as worthy in the far corner of the barracks, Jin's third target. You're nothing without clan backing, the stranger said mockingly. I'm Mirat of the Celine family. My older brother Jerome has been studying here for 3 years as an inner disciple of the school. I just have to say the word and he'll crush you. So better yield me the position of barracks commander. The introduction wasn't appealing, but since Jin had undertaken to push his authority, he needed to do it to the end. A mocking smirk spread across his face. Are you afraid to take a step without your big brother? But he's not here. So if someone ripped out your tongue, he couldn't complain. What a shame. With such people it was worth speaking their language, the language of force and intimidation. From these words Mirat's face turned purple with fury. Apparently the guy hadn't expected such a reaction. He clenched his fist so hard his knuckles went white. The Celine family representative cursed and rushed into attack with his fist raised to strike. How easy it was to provoke him. Had they really recruited a bunch of idiots as candidates? Or was being in the common barracks supposed to help identify such candidates? Though it wasn't clear what to do with them next, Jin didn't even bother straining himself, having already felt his own increased strength. At the last moment, before Mirat's fist should have smashed into his face, he slightly shifted his body aside and delivered a ringing slap with his palm. No need to change approach, and complaining about slaps was somehow shameful. The unlucky fighter's head jerked, and he noisily crashed to the floor but remained conscious. Don't get up, Jin told him in a cold tone, or I'll finish you off. And Mirat remained lying there, surprisingly not even mentioning his brother. But in the future he needed to be careful. A hostile third year could be a problem, especially from inner disciples. They should at least possess several spiritual techniques and train much more thoroughly than outer ones. The crowd buzzed approvingly. Apparently now they'd become much bolder. Someone even tried to produce pathetic clapping but quickly fell silent under Jin's icy gaze. Any other volunteers to test their strength? He announced loudly, reminding them that only the strongest was worthy to lead the barracks. All to identify the fourth and finish with this. He didn't want to receive punishment from the technique simply because time ran out. At this moment the last opponent stepped forward. a tall guy with chestnut hair. "I acknowledge your strength," he said with a smirk, "but you're wrong to underestimate others. Will pathetic slaps really work against my clan's techniques?" Jin squinted, appraisingly running his gaze over the guy boasting of clan wealth. "What technique have you mastered to be so confident of victory, Kinro?" He'd guessed the name correctly. Instead of answering, Kin bared his torso. Barely visible patterns began emerging on his skin, gradually covering his entire body with shining script. When the pattern closed, a barely noticeable force field shimmered around the guy, running over his skin like a second skin. "Iron body technique," Kin said proudly, "which makes me invulnerable to enemy strikes." He took a fighting stance. Apparently this battle would be harder than previous ones. Jin hadn't yet encountered spiritual techniques except the one that brazenly tried to ruin his life. But retreating was impossible. "No way!" He rushed forward, activating internal chi circulation on the move. Kin also didn't waste time and charged to meet him. They clashed in the middle of the barracks, quickly exchanging blows. Jin's fists smashed into the impenetrable cocoon of protective technique, while Kin's strikes slid off him without causing much harm. He wasn't planning to stand still. Vibrations from his opponent's technique were felt, but it held. For now. Deflecting another of Kin's strikes, Jin stepped back and opened his status window. Free characteristic points still remained there. Without thinking about consequences, he immediately put 10 points into strength, feeling his body fill with new might. Kin apparently decided his opponent was retreating and smirked smugly. "Your strikes are worthless. Acknowledge my superiority. Then I'll graciously appoint you as junior assistant. I need capable people." Instead of answering, Jin sharply closed the distance. Kin almost managed to react and swung back, but his opponent ducked under the blow and grabbed him by the chest. Kin's eyes widened in surprise. Then came the ringing sound of a slap. And it repeated again and again, with each word Jin spoke. "So my strikes don't scare you?" he asked, delivering smacks. Under the hail of blows, Kin's iron body technique began cracking and crumbling. Each slap knocked out part of his spirit and pride. Finally, unable to endure, he went limp in his opponent's grip. Those gathered around were sufficiently impressed by what was happening. "I surrender," Kin wheezed, admitting defeat. Jin shoved him away, brushing off his hands. Kin heavily collapsed to his knees, shaking with coughs. The other students fearfully stepped back, forming a wide circle around them. Looking over each one and making sure no one else would think of challenging him, Jin silently walked to the bed he'd initially chosen. "All hail the barracks commander!" Someone among the guys shouted, and the rest suddenly began chanting this. One of the candidate students addressed Jin, asking if he wanted anything. "I want to sleep," he replied calmly, and everyone immediately fell silent. Sitting on the bunk, he had to listen to Finn's admiration. The guy literally retold everything that had happened, each time marveling that Jin was not only strong but also fought excellently, and the arrogant bastards got what they deserved. The guy even offered a piece of melon, though beforehand he looked at it like he was tearing it from his heart. But frankly, he didn't feel like eating. Surprisingly, no one else made noise. Quiet conversations sounded here and there, but even they soon died down. Jin lay down on the hard surface, and finally the cloudless sky techniques text appeared. Additional task: can't beat them, lead them, completed. Reward: barracks commander title. Respect of fellow candidates. What else to expect? That one day the technique would give a real reward? Time to get used to this. So unnoticeably Jin fell asleep. Tomorrow would be a truly important day, but he was calm. Since he'd managed to defeat the quartet of supposedly strongest candidates, there shouldn't be problems getting into the top 10 either. Probably. Chapter 12, Interlude. High on a hill, in an elegant pavilion, two men sat enjoying a wonderful view and excellent wine. One of them, a young man about 25 years old, was none other than the fifth master of the Lunar Steppe sect, Arterian Rothan. He'd reached significant heights on the cultivation path and earned respect from many. Despite his appearance, the practitioner was almost twice Gilran's age, his own student. From the outside it looked like Gilran, an experienced middle-aged man, was showing respect to some youth. But in reality, having reached a certain stage, a practitioner could restore his youthful appearance. Though such things could also be achieved through alchemy. Youth pills allowed you to preserve your appearance for many years, if you took them regularly. A light breeze stirred Arterian's long hair while he thoughtfully turned a jade cup with ruby liquid in his hands. The wine Gilran had taken from his spatial pouch was truly outstanding. The story of how he'd acquired it was curious too. "Did you really find some practitioner's old cash?" Arterian asked with a slight smirk. He took a small sip of the aromatic drink. Gilran nodded, and a spark of merriment flashed in his eyes. Most things there turned out to be junk, but that person clearly knew wine. Protected his stash better than everything else. "How many bottles did you manage to get?" Arterian asked. A mysterious smile appeared on Gilran's face. "Several still remain. Such rarities could be sold quite profitably, or presented as gifts to gain favor with higher-ups. Arterian chuckled knowingly. His student had always been pragmatic and knew how to extract benefit from everything. But right now the master was interested in something else. What about that newcomer you brought? Jinri, I believe. Though I don't recall such a clan. His student shook his head. There isn't one. I hope this time you haven't erred in your choice, Arterian said. In all his years of wandering, Gilran had brought 2 talented practitioners to the sect. But both, having achieved certain success, turned onto a slippery path by acquiring demonic beast bloodlines. After which they were expelled from the sect for quite understandable reasons. They could have been killed for breaking rules, but they were at the beginning of their path and it was their choice. Despite the dark path, they hadn't violated the laws of the greater sect their school belonged to. So formally they couldn't be touched. Another matter was that no one monitored their fate anymore. But now unshakable confidence burned in the man's eyes. Pouring more wine into his cup, Gilran said, "This case is special. Trust me, we just need to wait a little, and Jinri will surely prove himself. I feel enormous potential in him." Arterian thoughtfully stroked his chin, studying his student. In the end, he decided to trust the instincts of a man who'd long become a master of their sect himself. "I'll take your word for it. But what do you plan to do next? Return to seeking talents?" His student didn't like sitting still and preferred wandering to seclusion and meditation at the Lunar Steppes sect springs. Despite his title of 20th Master, Gilran devoted his efforts to seeking young talents, as well as traveling the world and gathering necessary herbs, artifacts, and techniques for the sect. Though he sought students more to fulfill his duties, since Arterian's students simply loved adventure and wandering. Actually, from such wanderings he often brought curiosities that even his mentor had never seen. The spirit of adventure was too strong in the man, which meant he couldn't be restricted. But this time, to his teacher's surprise, Gilran shook his head. "If you'll allow, I'd like to stay at the sanctuary for now. Intuition tells me my place is here." At least at this stage. Arterian raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. After all, extra hands wouldn't hurt them now. Moreover, he had to let his student make independent decisions, which positively affected overcoming barriers on his cultivation path. "I agree, but since the 20th Master has returned to our sanctuary, you'll have to help the sect with various errands. You understand, there's no end of business, and capable people are always in short supply." Gilran grimaced like he had a toothache. The prospect of carrying out errands from arrogant rich clans didn't appeal to him at all, but their sect's capabilities were partly built on this, and they couldn't refuse such support. "You know, intrigue and politics aren't my element. I'm more about battles and martial arts, plus some research of ancient places." Arterian cast a mysterious glance at the cloudless sky and smiled barely noticeably, as if he knew some secret. "You'll get plenty of battles too. Great changes are coming. I feel it in the air. Our sect will need all possible strength, though it's unknown how much time we have in reserve." Gilran straightened upon hearing these words. His eyes lit up with anticipation. If his teacher predicted battles, then soon he'd have a chance to prove himself, possibly elevate his position in the sect, maybe even make a breakthrough. Recent years Gilran had been stuck a hair's breadth from the second star of the true sphere. This was also one reason why he wanted to stay on sect territory. Only here could he calmly immerse himself in meditation, and sparring with other sect masters could give him much. The 2 men sat in silence for some more time, enjoying wine and nature's beauty. Tension hung in the air, as if in anticipation of a coming storm, but this didn't frighten them. After all, for adherents of the martial path, danger was what they always craved. The sun slowly declined toward sunset, painting the sky in scarlet and golden tones. Gilran suddenly rose and, bowing respectfully, thanked him for wise guidance and pleasant conversation. "But it's time for me to return." Arterian nodded approvingly and waved his hand, dismissing his willful student. He himself remained sitting in the pavilion, lost in thought. Changes were on the horizon, and he had to do everything possible so the Lunar Steppes sect would meet them fully armed. Jinri. With the first rays of sun, candidates were rudely awakened by Junior Master Zen. He didn't stand on ceremony, delivering kicks to the sleepiest ones. Jin winced when a particularly loud shriek from one unlucky neighbor cut through his ears. Everyone around stirred and began climbing out of their beds, groaning and stretching. Apparently Jin wasn't the only one whose whole body ached from the hard bunks. Sleeping on branches and grass would be better than this crap, he thought. I never imagined a bed could be this bad. Maybe they'd deliberately made them this way? Maybe all checks and trials had begun from the moment of settling in this place? Get up and stop dawdling, blockheads. Junior Master Zen roared. You have little time. Wash, dress, and form up in the courtyard. At this rate you'll never become even outer disciples of the sect. The future students, as everyone wanted to believe, reluctantly but obediently complied. All trudged behind the barracks where wooden tubs of water stood. Out of the corner of his eye, Jin noticed his yesterday's opponents. Kador, Kin, and 2 others were bandaged but held themselves confidently. And surprisingly, none of them looked at him sideways. The junior master said nothing about it either. Strange. Wouldn't he be punished after all? So fights to establish hierarchy among candidates were the norm? Or had the master simply decided to turn a blind eye? He had too little information about this. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling from behind. Its owner was again the chewing Finn, who'd managed to stuff his mouth with something even in the morning. "Morning, Jin," Finn greeted cheerfully, approaching closer. Jin returned the greeting and wondered where the guy managed to get food. Finn grinned, showing strong white teeth, and pulled a bundle of long stems with small leaves from his shirt. "This is Toothbiter. Gotta watch my teeth to eat a lot. Girls love big guys. My mom always said so. And my mom." "If girls love big guys," Jin interrupted mockingly, "it's clearly not about weight." Finn winked slyly and turned the conversation to girls. "See how that beauty's looking at you? Drilling you with her gaze. I learned a bit about her. Her name's Mei Li. Little is known about her. They say she's of Eastern blood, from a small closed family. Why would a closed family send her here?" Jin wondered. "Don't such families only train within their bloodline?" Finn shrugged. "How would I know? Maybe she didn't please the family head or something. I was exiled for just that. Who needs a bastard competitor when there are already enough heirs?" Jin turned his head in the indicated direction and met the gaze of the black-haired girl, the same one he'd saved yesterday from Kador's advances. She immediately blushed and looked away with sapphire eyes, washing her face with cool water. "Well, she really had been staring, and I hadn't noticed." Finn continued chattering without stopping, periodically chomping and completely not noticing that Jin was listening with half an ear. "Today's an important day. I heard they combined potential assessment and entrance exam for the first time. I'd love to know what'll be there." But he wasn't allowed to finish. With a loud roar like a fierce tiger, Junior Master Zen flew toward them. "Are you a flock of sheep?" he bellowed, driving them away from the washing area. "Quickly form up in the courtyard. You're dragging like wounded sheep." The Lunar Steps sex courtyard was huge, and as far as Jin understood, this wasn't even the main one, since there was also an inner courtyard where no one was admitted except particularly successful students. Finn had already managed to chatter about this to him, not leaving his side the whole way. Unlike Jin, he knew much more about the sect and readily shared this information, though inconsistently and jumping to topics he considered more important, but nonetheless. In the middle of the courtyard rose a stone building, apparently the main hall, and around it were 10 small fabric tents, around each of which candidates were already crowding. "Listen up," Junior Master Zen barked. "Now we'll determine candidates' potential. You need to form 10 columns, 1 per tent. Get moving." Everyone bustled about, beginning to line up. Jin decided to go toward the back of his column, despite people trying to yield their place to him thanks to yesterday's performance. Standing at the very end, he began watching what was happening with interest. The junior master continued ranting, explaining the procedure. Potential assessment will show candidates' body structure and the chi foundation laid in them. Based on its results, you'll be assigned a rank. This is needed to understand who deserves more attention. An incense stick will be placed before each person. You'll need to touch it and light it with your inner strength. Depending on how quickly it burns and what smoke it emits, talent will be determined. Excited whispers arose nearby. Apparently not everyone knew about such an assessment system. Jin himself was hearing about it for the first time. 6 ranks, Junior Master Zen announced loudly. Lowest, white smoke, slow smoldering. This is an almost hopeless case. Such candidates will immediately be kicked out of the sect. Note that no one will listen to your complaints. Get stronger and return for a new attempt or try getting into another sect. All this was said in such a contemptuous tone that it became clear they shouldn't even try to avoid disgrace. Higher goes ordinary, unusual, gifted, outstanding, unique. The last, if smoke is purple and incense burns in a few seconds. This is the ceiling for most blockheads. About heavenly and divine talents you needn't even dream. Such geniuses are born once in 1,000, or even 10,000 years. Is everything clear? Go into tents one by one. The lines slowly moved. Jin watched carefully as candidates came out after the procedure. Many walked dejectedly, sadly informing acquaintances about ordinary potential. They hadn't even been given gifted. There were also those who joyfully bounced outside. He heard one guy boasting to his friend about gifted rank. Gradually Jin's turn approached too. Right before him Kinro entered the tent, the same one whose iron body technique he'd broken yesterday. Judging by his bandaged face, he'd gotten it good. Kin came out of the tent looking satisfied and confident. Some toady immediately rushed up to him. They whispered about something. Then the guy loudly exclaimed about outstanding rank. As expected from the master. Blue smoke is very hard to get. After this Kin cast an expectant glance at Jin. The youth's turn had come. and Qin clearly hoped his opponent's potential would prove lower. That would make it easier to say later that yesterday's victory was chance. Not restraining his curiosity, Jin stepped into the tent. A small room lit by yellow light from several oil lamps appeared before him. In the center stood a wide table of dark wood, behind which sat an old man. His gray beard fell almost to his belt, and his eyes glimmered with the wisdom of lived years. The old man paid no attention to Jin, concentrating on examining an almost burned-out incense stick from which blue smoke curled. This must be the one Qin had lit. Nothing happened for several moments, but then the old man carefully placed the smoldering stick on the far table and turned his gaze to Jin. "I am Vaihira Manlu, one of the Lunar Steppe sex elders," the old man introduced himself. His voice was quiet but strong at the same time. Calmness and tranquility emanated from him. Jin bowed respectfully, pressing palm to fist, greeting the respected elder. The old man nodded, clearly satisfied with the greeting, and gestured to a stool opposite him. "We have important business ahead." Jin sat, feeling slight excitement. What if the cloudless sky technique somehow influenced the test outcome? So far it had been suspiciously silent, not giving any tasks like get divine talent or die of diarrhea. Elder Vaihira meanwhile took a new incense stick and held it out to Jin. "Take this with both hands and feel your chi. Direct it from your fingertips to the stick center. Imagine how life energy gathers at one point and blazes with hot flame. Focus on this image and don't let it go." Jin obediently took the stick, feeling its weak aroma, and closed his eyes. As the elder said, he imagined an energy stream flowing through his arms and converging at the stick's tip. Nothing like this had worked for him before, but he thought not all candidates could even slightly control their chi, which meant something in this place helped them with this. Heat began growing inside, as if flame really was igniting there. The youth mentally urged his chi on, directing all strength to the stick's tip. Several long moments passed, and he caught the faint smell of smoke. Opening his eyes wide, Jin saw a thin whitish stream curling from the stick. He held his breath. Gradually the smoke began thickening, darkening, and the stick burned faster. In a minute dark blue spirals were already floating in the air, and the scent spread throughout the tent. Elder Vaihira smiled approvingly into his beard and nodded. "Outstanding talent? Excellent. You will amount to something. The chi in your body is remarkably pure and concentrated for your age. Continue diligently cultivating and you'll go far on the cultivation path." Jin exhaled, feeling tension release him. Apparently the cloudless sky technique hadn't affected his body too strongly, or conversely, had affected it strongly since he got such a result. Hard to say definitively. The youth thanked the elder, bowing low. "Rarely in our time do you meet those who know manners and show respect." Vaihira smiled again. Jin bowed once more and left the tent, squinting from the sun. Lucky ones who'd received high ranks were already crowding in the courtyard. Seeing him, Finn waved his arms joyfully. "What were your results?" Jin smiled and reported, "Outstanding talent," feeling strange lightness throughout his body. "Amazing." Finn was amazed. "I only got unusual. But that's just a name. Everything will be decided now, on the entrance exam." The last young people were already coming out of tents, while Junior Master Zen stood evilly with arms crossed, waiting until he could finally start shouting again. Interlude. This youth named Jin had greatly lifted Vaihira's spirits. Gilran really knew how to find worthy students. Which couldn't be said about their further fate, but that wasn't his fault. After all, the 20th master of their sect simply sought talents, while their polishing was handled by junior masters and heaven itself. Outstanding talent, quite good. Word had already reached Vaihira that this boy had been just an ordinary village hunter. To have potential similar to what offspring of influential clans like Ro had. This was worth being proud of. Jin was the last candidate for today. So the elder rose, slowly carrying the incense stick streaming dark blue smoke to the table with the others. Extinguishing incense lit by chi power was bad luck. And Vaihira respected such things, though he considered it foolishness. He slowly left the tent to observe how the entrance exam for candidates would go. And unfortunately, he missed perhaps the most incredible moment of his life. The stick Jin had lit suddenly flared brighter, and the smoke changed from blue to dark purple. But in the next instant the unburned half that remained disappeared in one moment, producing smoke black as the most hopeless night. So black that it absorbed light from the oil lamp standing nearby. Chapter 13. Jin fell into formation alongside the other candidates. His chest tightened with nerves as he faced the upcoming trial. Junior Master Zen scanned them with his disapproving gaze, as if searching for anyone foolish enough to let their guard down. "You young fools are lucky today," the master barked. "The sect elders will be watching you, along with the 20th and 21st masters of the Lunar Steppe sect. This is a great honor. You better not disgrace everyone who worked so hard preparing these trials." His voice echoed across the entire courtyard, bouncing off the stone walls of the training halls. People around them began whispering, exchanging surprised glances. The first trial, the junior master announced, is a test of physical strength and spiritual fortitude. He paused dramatically, scanning the candidates with a withering stare. The master pointed toward a towering mountain whose base began just beyond the sect walls. High up on the slope, at the very peak, a red flag bearing the Lunar Steps sect emblem fluttered in the wind. Whichever candidate can reach it first and bring it down will advance as the victor. The rest will be judged by the elders based on their performance. The master warned that other disciples, those who had already studied for a year or more, would try to interfere, but they wouldn't be too harsh. For the candidates, this was also part of the examination. They needed to prove themselves and remember they were being watched. Unease crept up Jin's spine at the prospect of facing more experienced sect disciples. More precisely, at the thought that the cloudless sky technique would force him to fight them. They had likely achieved some progress during their year of training. Either way, for most candidates, they would be serious opponents. But it made perfect sense that such trials wouldn't be simple. After all, they aspired to become practitioners, a path of hardships and overcoming oneself. You set out in 5 minutes, Junior Master Zen commanded. Use this time to prepare yourselves and focus your spirits. Jin stepped aside where no one would disturb his concentration. Crossing his legs, he sat on the stone tiles and drew in the cool morning air with deep breaths. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Don't rush. Recklessness in the mountains can cost you your life. Don't charge ahead recklessly. Move steadily. Think ahead. Conserve your strength. The mountains will test you. But a hunter must always keep a cool head. Jin opened his eyes, feeling calm and determined. His father was right. Mountains demanded composure and calculation, not blind zeal. He would manage this. After all, chasing prey through ridges and ravines was familiar territory for him. The trumpet call of Junior Master Zen rang across the courtyard, announcing the start. Everyone surged forward as one, driven by fear of falling behind. Jin allowed himself to lag behind the main group, following their trail at an unhurried pace. They rushed through the narrow sect gates, and an incredible view opened before him. At the very foot of the mountain sat a group of elders in silvery robes that radiated dignity and authority. Jin noticed faint waves of spiritual energy emanating from them, like heat shimmer on a hot day. Among them was the already familiar Elder Vaihihira. But most importantly, beside them sat 2 men engaged in animated conversation. One was Gilran, and Jin didn't know the other, but apparently he was the 21st master of the sect. If the 20th master seemed quiet, like an ocean on a windless day, as if carefully restraining his incredible power, the second blazed like fire. His aura radiated overwhelming might, washing over everything in waves of concentrated spiritual energy. Jin nearly stumbled in surprise when this warrior's gaze lingered on him longer than on anyone before him, or so it seemed. The man gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if approvingly assessing the young man's behavior. 20th Master Gilran and 21st Master Sarmosha Ryan. Junior Master Zen roared. Jin looked up, trying to trace a preliminary route up the mountain, as far as his position allowed. From here it was clear the path would be far from easy. Cliffs, rock slides, narrow trails. But nothing supernatural for him, or for other candidates reasonably prepared for the climb. Which meant they should expect something unusual, something you definitely wouldn't anticipate. Begin, the junior master bellowed, and the entire crowd of candidates erupted like a hurricane. Jin picked up his pace, but not to the limit like some others who basically wouldn't sustain such intensity much further. He chose a more measured tempo. Despite the explosion of activity around him, his heart beat steady and calm. Yes, many had charged ahead with all their might, greedily gulping each breath. But mountains test not only strength, but endurance and the ability to properly distribute your efforts. Very soon the frontrunners began to falter. Some stumbled on uneven paths, others were forced to slow down and catch their breath. A bunch of the most reckless ones crashed out entirely, tumbling into steep ravines. Jin continued at his own pace. The soles of his sturdy boots gripped the solid surfaces, preventing missteps. His breathing was even, his gaze sharp and attentive, carefully assessing each outcrop and ledge. In rhythm with his steps, that special synchronicity with the surrounding world emerged in his heart, the same feeling he'd experienced in the forest on his way here. The mountains responded, accepting him as one of their own. There was no unnecessary fear, no false bravado, only smooth and measured movement, like a beast on the trail. A beast ready to keep moving, but able to spring forward at any moment if it spotted prey. In this rhythm he continued onward, allowing practically all the other candidates to overtake him. He was right not to rush initially. The higher the path went, the harder it would be to breathe. The mountain air would force many to stop and rest. Few people even thought about such details unless they had lived near mountains themselves. Then Jin caught some movement from the corner of his eye. He stopped abruptly, peering ahead and crouching slightly to dodge aside at the first sign of threat. From behind a rocky outcrop flew that same girl with black hair and sapphire eyes, the one he'd protected from Kador in the barracks. She was literally soaring above the trail, only occasionally touching the stone with her feet. Jin was nearly knocked off balance by the airwave emanating from the girl, but he held his ground. Air currents visibly swirled around her feet. Could she possess some kind of movement technique? The girl glanced at him briefly and nodded in a friendly manner before gliding onward. In a moment she had vanished from sight, leaving him bewildered. If she had a technique, why couldn't she fight off that big guy in the barracks? Why had she hidden her abilities until now? Her knowledge probably wasn't limited to just one technique. After pondering this, Jin decided not to burden his mind with unnecessary thoughts. If there were reasons for this, he certainly shouldn't meddle. After walking another half-kilometer, he caught up with one of the participants who had stumbled and injured his ankle. And he wasn't the only one. More and more frequently Jin encountered candidates breathing heavily as they sat on rocks. Many had managed to injure themselves somewhere, though nothing too serious. Overall the path along the wide trail was gradual, but the further he climbed, the narrower and more dangerous it became. Thin tripwires began appearing everywhere, stretched like traps. However, they had already been triggered by those who went ahead, thus making Jin's path easier, for which he was actually grateful. Sometimes he spotted other silhouettes nearby, candidates trying to clear the trail, but as soon as they noticed him, they fled in terror, frightened by his menacing appearance. It seemed his recent performance in the barracks had instilled fear in them. At such moments Jin barely suppressed a satisfied smirk. The fear of others was useful protection against any schemes in the first stage. No one would dare oppose him, lest they provoke his wrath. The candidates scattered every which way, and this only worked in his favor. He continued moving at his measured pace. But ahead, loud shouts and curses rang out. Listening carefully, Jin distinguished arrogant calls similar to those that had echoed in the barracks the day before. Someone was demanding payment for passage, addressing their victim in extremely insulting terms. Moving cautiously toward the sounds, he saw 3 outer disciples. Their bright silver robes with the crescent moon emblem on their chests marked them as such. They had surrounded one of the candidates who was pressed back against the rock, trying to hide somehow. Then Jin recognized the chubby boy. It was Finn. Now his round face was twisted with fear, and his small eyes darted from side to side, searching for an escape route. "Just a small fee, so we'll look the other way and let you pass," one of the disciples continued, mocking him. "This isn't even a bribe. Just a collection for protection from random rockfalls and such things. You're from a wealthy family. What would it cost you?" the disciple said, approaching the boy. The other 2 thugs burst into laughter. Hadn't Junior Master Zen said they wouldn't be too harsh? And before Jin could think about anything, the cloudless sky technique manifested before his eyes once again. Additional mission. Become a protector of the weak. Protect Finn from the extortionists. Reward? Penalty for refusal. Abnormal condition. Body will emit a horrifying smell of rotten eggs for 1 month. Jin swallowed hard, imagining this prospect. The smell of rotten eggs? He'd become a laughingstock. No one would dare approach within 100 paces of him. The thought of such humiliation sent a shudder of disgust through him. And how exactly did this technique determine the conditions for triggering missions and penalties anyway? How terrifying. On the other hand, he and Finn were already acquainted. Would he really let some disciples mock him with impunity? Since this demonic technique was forcing him, their levels shouldn't be too high, right? Looking at the text that appeared above their heads when he focused, Jin smiled broadly. The decision was made in an instant. "Hey, idiots!" he roared, attracting the disciples' attention. "How about I pay you with a beating? In my opinion, a very fair deal." The 3 spun around sharply, giving him puzzled looks. All cut from the same cloth. It was even hard to tell them apart. Arrogant faces, brown hair, except one was bigger. Obviously the leader. He stepped forward, spreading into a bloodthirsty grin. "Fresh meat? What a rarity in these parts. I can see the manners are rustic, country style. Probably herded cows and talked to them." His cronies cackled, delighting in what seemed to Jin rather questionable wit from their leader. The man himself stepped forward, boring into the young man with an insolent stare. "Get lost while you're still in one piece," the senior disciple advised. "We have our own rules here, set by us, the outer disciples. Pay the passage fee or forget about passing the entrance exam." "It's not necessary," Finn fearfully babbled. "These are my troubles. Please leave." However, Jin just laughed in response. "Troubles? More like stepping in dog shit. All you need to do is clean it off." The eldest of the disciples bristled upon hearing these words. "You'll answer for your rotten words," he snarled, his face contorting in a grimace of rage. The disciple lunged sharply toward Jin, but he was ready, moving swiftly aside from his attack. Grabbing the attacker's wrist, Jin spun sharply and threw his heavy body over his shoulder, using the man's own momentum and furious rush. The guy crashed onto the stones with a deafening thud, gasping for air. Without waiting for him to recover, Jin struck him in the chest, making the poor fool's eyes nearly pop out of their sockets. After which he assumed a fighting stance, focusing intently on the remaining opponents. 7th level, was it? Apparently in a year they hadn't learned anything, since they hadn't advanced much beyond the average candidate. Jin had already overcome Kinro's iron body technique, who was also 7th level, which meant these shouldn't be a problem either. He had no choice anyway, but he never intended to retreat. Never. Who's next? The young man smirked. Chapter 14. Jin raised his hands in a fighting stance, ready for the next attack. The 2 remaining thugs glared at him with pure malice, still unable to believe that an outer disciple had just been humiliated by some candidate who shouldn't even know basic techniques. That shock instantly twisted into hatred toward this nobody who dared defy them. Funny how quickly you forget where you came from once you climb a little higher. Without hesitation, both guys thrust their hands forward in perfect sync. The air around them shimmered. Then 2 streams of spiritual energy surged toward Jin, taking the shape of razor-sharp turquoise spears. A spiritual attack technique. Jin flinched involuntarily, realizing he couldn't just dodge anymore. Those things could pierce straight through any careless practitioner. Hell, they could punch through solid stone walls with enough energy behind them. And here he was, barely a day into his cultivation path, supposed to fight this. Still. No time to think. Out of the corner of his eye, Jin saw the terrified Finn trying to crawl away to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. The guy wouldn't stand a chance if he failed here. Fury coursed through his blood in that moment. He wouldn't waste this opportunity. He wouldn't let these scumbags block his path. With a sharp motion, Jin opened his status window. He had 30 free attribute points left from his pre-exam distribution. Without hesitation, he dumped 20 of them into spiritual energy. Chi energy roared through his body like molten fire. Jin could almost hear it humming as it circulated through his meridians and spiritual nodes. With each heartbeat, his inner strength grew visibly stronger. Whatever complications this demonic technique brought him, it sure delivered on power. He had exactly 2 seconds to gather all his chi and counter this incredible spiritual attack, way above his cultivation stage. That was his only shot at survival, acting on pure instinct since he had nothing but his own will. Focusing hard, Jin recalled the sensation of pill crafting, that unity with the world, awareness of every particle of energy flowing around him. All the experience the cloudless sky technique had given him, now he'd use it. Chi wrapped around his hands, creating a thin, transparent veil. And he made it. Thrust his hands forward, catching the shimmering spears. The ground beneath him buckled, but he stubbornly stayed on his feet, teeth clenched so hard his face contorted with strain. The spears bore into his defense for what felt like endless moments. The attacking technique packed serious power. That's the difference between Kinro and outer disciples for you. But Jin's chi proved a worthy opponent. Like him, it stubbornly resisted, refusing to let the enemy energy pass. Finally, he found the strength to sweep his arms aside, deflecting the spears with them. When Jin stepped clear, he simply released the energy he'd channeled through his technique. The attacking technique shot forward, slamming into the cliff face and leaving 2 deep holes with branching cracks spreading outward. A wave of his hand, and the chi dispersed from his hands like it had never been there. Jin looked up at his stunned opponents. They stared back in speechless horror, unable to fully believe what had just happened. His success surprised Jin just as much. He'd acted almost purely on instinct, guided by an inner voice. If that attack had been even slightly stronger, things could have ended very badly. But now, with both extortionists frozen in shock, Jin wasn't about to waste his chance. He charged forward furiously, putting all his remaining strength behind the assault. His fist slammed into one guy's jaw while the other caught a knife hand strike to the neck. They didn't even have time to react before they were sprawled unconscious on the rocks. Hard to believe he'd actually done that. Jin caught his breath, wiping his sweaty forehead with his sleeve. Everything was spinning slightly. He'd definitely screwed something up using spiritual energy so intensively. Or maybe channeling chi always had these side effects? Finn ran over to him, still trembling slightly from lingering fear. Thanks for the rescue. We won't see those bastards again, at least not during the exam. The guy was amazed at how Jin had deflected the attack. I had no idea you practiced chi manipulation. Jin shrugged, getting his breathing back to normal. Honestly, don't know how I pulled it off, just did what felt right. But you'll have to handle things yourself from here. I need to move. Gotta get that flag before everyone else. Finn nodded with understanding and thanked him once more. With a farewell nod, Jin spun around and sprinted forward along the trail. He had to push the pace hard, sacrificing endurance for speed since he'd lost precious time playing hero. Speaking of which, side quest: become a protector of the weak. Complete. Reward: you have gained a friend. A friend is worth more than any reward. Damn system. But it seemed to be changing somehow. First the quest names had become different. More Alive, somehow. Now there was this weird note in the reward, if this thing was evolving along with him. No. He didn't even want to think about what punishments it might dream up when his level increased. Pushing forward, Jin caught up with the slowest candidates and shamelessly passed them. They could only curse him for it, but nobody had forced them to waste so much energy on the first third of the route only to crawl along now. A couple times more outer disciples appeared on his path, busy with other candidates, but he just ran past. Look out for yourself, as they say, and apparently the school planned to demonstrate that lesson clearly. Further ahead, the real obstacles began. Traps became much more numerous. So much so that even those who'd been in front couldn't trigger them all. Crude spears shot up from underground. Heavy logs came crashing down from above with thunderous roars. Jin had to push all his skills to the limit. Jumps, rolls, sharp sidesteps, all that practice fighting for his life turned out incredibly useful. Traps fell behind as he raced along the narrow path ahead. His movements were fluid, like a beast entering the hunt. The young man had become so attuned to the surrounding nature that he'd become part of it. The mountains accepted him as a native son. The solid rocks became his reliable foundation. This way, he barely noticed passing most of the other candidates. The midday sun beat down from above while the trail began winding sharply, snaking along steep ledges. Jin climbed higher and higher toward his goal, sometimes scrambling up nearly vertical cliffs. Then suddenly he spotted something ahead, a human silhouette, moving slowly and unhurriedly, breaking traps on his path with mere touch. Spears and wooden arrows bent and shattered against his body. Flames caused him no harm. Soon Jin could make out exactly who was walking forward so calmly with a winner's attitude. It was Kin Ro from their barracks, that rich clan's son. Thick hair slicked back, broad shoulders squared, his whole posture practically begging for a punch. But most importantly, his torso was covered in ghostly armor made of ringing energy. Looked like the iron body technique was serving him well in this trial. Ignoring everything around him, Kin strode forward with powerful steps, smashing through any obstacle. Jin carefully followed behind, waiting for him to clear the entire remaining path. Why not? If such an opportunity presented itself, might as well take it. Much easier to follow this arrogant jerk than throw himself into the whirlwind of dangers. Especially since this stretch of traps was way more serious than the previous ones. Kin kept congratulating himself on his successes, certain the prize was in his hands. So he completely failed to notice Jin. Finally, Kin's energy armor left nothing behind but splinters and dust. They emerged onto a wide ledge with a breathtaking view. The final push, the entire valley spread below with its tiny houses, groves trembling in the wind, and blue mirror lakes. Straight ahead, a mountain peak rose sharply, shrouded in wisps of gray mist. And at the very summit flew a crimson banner with the Moonwalk School's silver-embroidered crest. Kin Ro laughed triumphantly and picked up his pace, intending to reach the goal first. But the moment he stepped onto the narrow path leading upward, a hail of small stones and debris poured down from above. Before Jin's eyes, this entire rocky avalanche buried the overconfident guy completely. The iron body technique flared with bright light for an instant, trying to protect its master from the barrage of impacts. But under the incredible pressure, it wavered and shattered despite all of Kin's efforts to maintain control over his technique, crumbling to dust on the stones. Jin spat. So much for clan superiority. The moment Kin got a little cocky, he was immediately knocked down by natural forces that didn't give a damn about their cultivation knowledge. One stupid mistake, and no technique could save you if the mountain decided to punish your arrogance. Though even then he had a chance to get out, but the guy had trusted his technique too much. Still, couldn't leave the idiot here. Even arrogance wasn't reason enough to let someone die. Besides, Kin hadn't personally done anything bad to Jin, and the school's examiners were probably still watching. He carefully approached where Kin had vanished under the rockfall and began skillfully shifting aside the two heaviest boulders. Maybe it wasn't much, but it would let the guy climb out from under the pile of rocks on his own. Which proved correct, because the moment he provided a little help, the stones began moving slowly. Making sure the guy was alive, Jin turned his gaze back up toward the mountain peak. Plus he could hear wind howling in the distance. He saw someone's silhouette below. And judging by how that figure was flashing rapidly through space, he had no doubt it was Mei with her unknown movement technique. True, she'd passed him earlier, but apparently chose a longer route. Before Jin stretched a steep rocky path leading upward, narrow and curved like a trail on an emerald carpet of moss. Seemed like the final, most brutal obstacles for those seeking the coveted flag lay closer to the summit. Listening to his inner voice, he chose the shortest route, leading away from the dangerous trail. In short dashes, gripping outcroppings with hands and feet, the young man began climbing along the nearly vertical cliff face. Stone bit into his palms, scraping them bloody, but Jin ignored the scratches. After all, This way his hands gripped any projection much more confidently than if he'd worn gloves. Muscles cramped from strain, each pull took enormous effort, like it was squeezing the last strength from him. But he stubbornly climbed higher and higher, not allowing himself a single mistake, a single thought that might make him slip. And then, with a final surge, Jin scrambled onto a wide ledge directly below the mountain's peak. Pulling himself up, vaulting over the outcropping in one motion, he collapsed to his knees, gulping air hungrily. His whole body ached with exhaustion, like he'd been crushed in a vice. But what sweet exhaustion it was, the exhaustion of someone who hadn't given up and reached his goal. A happy smile bloomed naturally on his face. Jin raised his eyes and nearly gasped at what he saw. Before him stretched an entire valley, like a green sea crossed by ribbons of rivers and streams. Along its floor, hills with groves of trees rose like waves, while multicolored meadows and clearings flowed like streams. And over all this magnificence were scattered tiny droplets, villages, and small towns. The view was even better than from the recent ledge where Qin had gotten stuck. From this height, the whole world lay spread like a map. It seemed small and fragile. It lay at his feet. His chest felt tight from the emotions filling him. In that moment, Jin understood. This was it, his path, what he had to pour his entire being into to understand true strength, and then the whole world really would be at his feet. He reached out and yanked the crimson banner with its silver crescent from the earth, wrapping it tightly so it wouldn't interfere with movement. And at that very moment, Junior Master Zen's booming shout echoed across all the mountain surroundings. His voice seemed amplified by some special technique, carrying the echo for many kilometers. A candidate named Jin has successfully claimed the flag, the master announced, but the others shouldn't despair. There's still a chance for everyone, because now the real fun begins. It doesn't matter who got the flag first. The winner will be whoever manages to bring it down. And don't forget there are beasts on the mountain too. Some candidates have already encountered them. So go for it, because only the strong will claim victory. Jin couldn't help but freeze, gripping the crimson banner in his hand. That junior master had literally painted a target on his back. Looked like the trip down would be much harder, and the man's last words suggested he might face more than just people. Here I share early drafts of my book so you can follow the story as it's being written. I post new parts as long as there's interest from you, the viewers. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a royal like.